If you didn't realize it, the Department of Agriculture has issued new nutrition standards for school lunches that will go into effect in February, which will dilute the high standards that were set by the Obama administration's 2010 Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act. We wanted to talk about this, what you can expect. Is this a trend, and what does this mean moving forward? Bettina Elias Siegel is a graduate of Yale and Harvard Law School. She also practiced intellectual property, advertising, and food law. She turned to a few other things relating to kids and lunches. As a matter of fact, started a blog called The Lunch Tray, and is a book coming out this year called Kid Food. It'll be published by Oxford University Press. We want to turn to her for some perspective on this. She is tweeting at The Lunch Tray and joins us now. Bettina Elias Siegel, thanks for being on POTUS today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us what kids have been eating, and tell us how this is going to change starting in February. And I guess this is sort of voluntary by school district, correct?
That's right. So, as you mentioned, the Healthy, Hungry Kids Act was enacted under the Obama administration, and that law represented a huge leap forward in terms of very outdated school nutrition standards. And so kids were now getting more whole grains, more fresh fruits and vegetables, lower sodium, lower fat, that kind of thing. And so, in 2017, the USDA checked in with schools, and 99% of districts were meeting those healthier standards. I think that's important to keep in mind. So what the USDA has just done is weakened 3 of those nutrition standards, specifically relating to whole grains, sodium, and a rule relating to the fat content in flavored milk.
Why did they do this?
Well, I think they did it under pressure from the School Nutrition Association, which is the group that represents 58,000 school food professionals, the people running school meal programs. Now, they had asked for a weakening of this grain standard, claiming that it was hard to find on the market whole grain rich products that were meeting the old standard. The improved standard. It's important to note, though, that the Obama administration had already set up a waiver system where if a district was having trouble finding a particular product, they could apply for a waiver. And with that waiver system in place, 85% of districts were still meeting the higher standard on whole grains. But nonetheless, the USDA kind of abolished that waiver system. So now schools are free to serve more refined grain foods than they were. And so, that's very troubling because, it doesn't seem like that was a necessary change, and yet it certainly has an impact on kids' health.
Who was behind the pushback, though? Was it the localities? Was it school districts around the country that were objecting to the standards as being too tough to meet, or was it somebody else?
I would say with respect to the whole grains and sodium, it was driven by as I said, the School Nutrition Association, which represents the people running school meal programs in districts around the country. I think that change on flavored milk, and just to explain what that is, even under the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act, kids could get flavored milk, but it had to be in a fat-free variety. And now, because of this most recent change, they can also get it in a 1% milk fat variety. I think that change, frankly, was driven by the dairy industry.
Once again, we are speaking with Bettina Elias Siegel, who's a writer and commentator. We're talking about issues of children's school lunches and new standards that go into effect in February. We should note, by the way, that the standards, the basis of the Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act, these standards came from the Institute of Medicine, which is something that was commissioned by President George W. Bush, right? I mean, this was actually started before the Obama administration.
Exactly. I mean, I think people so associate school food reform with Michelle Obama, as they properly should. She was a great champion of this incredibly important issue. But that's exactly right. I mean, even during the Bush administration, it was recognized that school meal standards were incredibly out of date, sorely in need of updating. He commissioned new standards from the Institute of Medicine, and then Michelle Obama and her husband's administration proceeded, based on those standards. So this should be a bipartisan issue based on science-based standards.
What does research show about how kids enjoy or do not enjoy? I mean, obviously, eat your vegetables is not something that plays very well at the kitchen table. How does it play in the schools?
Well, there have been these reports of increased food waste after the new standards went into effect. But those reports tend to be anecdotal, like the individual school nutrition director claiming that she or he is seeing an increase in waste, as compared to before the standards. But that's not the same thing as actually having done plate waste measurements before and after. And we do have two studies that did that. They come from very reputable sources. One is the Harvard School of Public Health. One is the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity at the University of Connecticut. And both of those studies did exactly that. They looked at plate waste before the new standards and after, found no increase in plate waste, and maybe even a decrease in plate waste in some situations. And that also, and this is really important, kids are eating more fruits and vegetables than they were before the new standards. So, I'm not trying to deny, the individual impressions of a school nutrition director in a particular district, but overall, we're not actually seeing an increase in plate waste.
There are about 30 million kids, from what I understand, who actually use the opportunity to get school lunches every day. This is not bringing it to school because they can bring all the potato chips they want. And about 2/3 of them are getting the meal either free or for a reduced price because they are low-income individuals. What, you study this issue. What does this mean long-term in terms of how their eating habits are determined, the kinds of food, whether it has any more disproportionate effect because they're young on their health? Give us a sense of what this means starting at a young age, how this sets you up as an adult.
Well, you've just put your finger on it. I mean, I think, as you said, 2/3 of the kids eating school meals don't have the option necessarily of bringing a packed lunch from home. And kids across the board can get up to, half their calories at school, depending on if they're taking school meals. So what they eat at school really, really does matter. And not just in terms of their daily nutrition, which is critical, but I think as you're, getting at, it also, kids from a very young age, as they go through that lunch line, are learning something from the school, whether we want them to or not. They're learning what a meal should look like. And so obviously it's imperative to make that meal as healthy as possible, because that really can set up children on the right dietary path, for life.
Bettina, just finally, for those who are concerned that this is just another example of the nanny state, telling kids what to eat and trying to control them in some ways, explain or address that criticism, concern of a school lunch oversight by the federal government.
Well, I always find that nanny state criticism really puzzling when we're actually talking about a federal child nutrition program. In other words, no one's telling parents what they can pack in their children's lunch or anything like that. There's no intrusion on the family. But all we're simply saying is if your child is going to take advantage of a federally funded child nutrition program, which is, critically important, then we would like those standards to be science-based. And that's literally all we're talking about. So I always find it kind of funny when, or even troubling, when this kind of nanny state rhetoric is brought into the debate, because we're just simply saying we would like to feed children as healthfully as possible. We're not talking about crazy over-the-top standards, simply, science-based, instituted medicine standards that, again, will set children up for healthy eating for life, we hope, and certainly on a daily basis provide them with necessary solid nutrition.
And is it too early to tell how many districts around the country will plan to comply, or not comply necessarily, but take advantage of the lessening of the restrictions, or how many will keep up with the standards as they are right now? As we mentioned, it's voluntary. Any sense of that?
It is really hard to tell. I was so pleased to see the Minneapolis public schools, I think it was like the day after, or maybe shortly after the Trump rollbacks were announced, they came out with a statement saying, no thanks, we're sticking with the standards. And oh, by the way, since we've had the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act standards in place, our program has, increased. We're serving, 1.25 million more breakfasts and lunches than we were before. So I hope districts will follow that example and stick to the higher standard, as they were able to do before these rollbacks went into place. But I am troubled. I mean, I think we've opened the floodgates a little bit for districts to kind of sink to a lower level when that really wasn't necessary.
Finally, when's the book come out?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's actually not coming out till November, but
November. Okay.
Pretty soon it'll be available for pre-order, and I'll put that on my blog, The Lunch Tray.
We will put it on our list to follow up and get a fuller conversation about this, because it is an issue, obviously, with 30 million kids having school lunches every day. And by the way, parents have kids in school, and you might want to know if it's a good option. So it's a part of public policy that we should talk about. It doesn't get a lot of play because it's not sexy and shiny, but we think it's important enough to have people on like you, and we appreciate you spending time with us. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. This was great to talk to you.
Bettina Elias Siegel, writer, commentator on issues relating to children and food policy. We mentioned the blog, The Lunch Tray. And again, the book coming out, as she mentioned, in November, a ways away. It will be talking about a kid food, and it will be published by Oxford University Press. And we will make it a point to have her on at that point. By the way, if you want to tweet, you can tweet at The Lunch Tray, at TheLunchTray.